Hi folks, welcome to the shed. Fixing up an Acoustic Solutions Strat copy today. If you just want to hear it being played, there'll be a link that you can click through to for a demo and my thoughts on this guitar. Otherwise stick around and we'll have a look at this and try and fix it. Let's take a closer look. This is a fairly generic Strat copy from China. It's branded Acoustic Solutions, which is the branding for Argos, which is a catalogue shop here in the UK which sells everything. And likely these guitars come out of a factory in China and get branded various things for various different companies throughout the world. This is in a real mess. There's a lot of DNA on the fretboard, which is rather nice. There's only 2 strings. Come down to the bridge and no screws holding the bridge in, which is slightly unusual. Let's flip it over and have a look at the back. So here's the main problem. The trem block has broken. It's shattered off where the trem arm goes in. So why did that happen? Well, it happened because this trem block's made of very cheap metal and it's very thin. But the other factor is that this trem block has never been set up from the factory, and the way that these Stratocaster copies leave the Chinese factory, they deck them out, so they tighten these screws in here, which tightens down the trem block, decks it out, and they do this because it's far too labour intensive at this price point on these guitars for somebody to take the time to set up the trem block. What then happens, of course, is that your budding beginner guitarist gets the trem arm, puts it in and finds it very, very stiff to use the trem arm. And then they get a bit excited and start doing a Jimi Hendrix, and they're battling against the tension of these strings, which is holding it down, and they're trying to pull it back here with the trem arm. And one of 2 things happens. Either it shatters off the housing that the trem arm goes into here, taking off part of the block with it, or sometimes the trem arm itself snaps in the thread and leaves part of the trem arm in the thread. So I'm going to replace this trem block. In fact, I'm going to replace it with something which is exactly the same quality. It should be a drop-in replacement. So why aren't I going to replace this with a trem block which is bigger, thicker and of better quality? Well, there's no reason for this to break as long as it's set up properly. And as long as we set this up properly, then there won't be any future risk of this happening. And the other reason is that I'm not modding this guitar. I'm not making it better than it should be. If you're going to put in a larger trem block here, you've got to take into account various factors. One of which is that this is a thin body, and if you put a larger block in, it's very likely that this block will stick out the back and you'll never get the plate back on it. The other thing that happens is that people put large trem blocks in, and then there isn't enough room for the trem block to move, which limits the amount of movement of the trem arm. It's very, very common to see guitars on the second-hand market which have been replaced with a large block, but somebody hasn't routed this out, and you have to be prepared to route this out if you're going to put in a large block, because often with a large block in here there's just not enough room for this to move. So we're not modding this guitar. We're just going to get it back working and set it up as it was never set up from the factory, and make it play as well as it can. There's some very nice wood grain on this neck, and it's often surprising that the quality of the necks on these very cheap Stratocasters is often very, very good. See if it works. Okay. Right, it's going to give it a clean up. Get these strings off. Clean the fretboard with naphtha. Still got some of the original pickguard plastic stuck underneath the neck. It looks like a bird's nest in there, it's gross. Oof. A lot of these tuners are loose. There's been some nice natural aging of the pickguard here, as you can see when you take the buttons off, the original very bright white against the cream colour of the aging, which is rather nice. So this is the moment of truth. Do the holes line up? And they do. Perfect. You don't tighten the screws right down because clearly you want the bridge to move. And I'm going to set this synchronous, which means that I'm going to set it so it's decked, but then you can push down on the trem bar to lift it up. I'm not going to set it floating. You could set it floating, but I think I like trems that are floating, but I'm not going to keep this guitar, so I suspect it will probably go to a beginner. So I think a good compromise is to have it decked most of the time, but you can still use the trem to lift the bridge, and I think that's sufficient movement there within the block. I don't know whether the frets are going to need levelling because I didn't have a set of strings on this before I started, so I'm going to have to risk putting a fresh set of strings on and see if it plays well. And if needs be, hopefully I'll be able to take the strings off, do any fretwork, and then put the strings back on again without them snapping. But before I risk opening a pack of strings, I would like to know if the truss rod is at least moving. The usual problem of the string tree getting in the way. I'm just tightening it because there's a little bit of a bow in the neck even without strings on, so just see if I can get it at least flat. Okay. I'm just polishing the frets using wire wool, using a metal protector to protect the fingerboard. take some pressure off the block.
The new trem arm was sitting too high off the guitar, which is very common with these replacement trem arms. So I'm just putting it in a vise to bend it so that it's not going to sit quite so high off the guitar. That should do it. I'm putting lemon oil on the fretboard, which of course isn't oil from lemons, it's mineral oil, so it's a bit like oil that you put in your car, but it's scented with lemon scent. Whether that comes from a lemon or not, I don't know. Clearly you don't want your guitar to be smelling like a rusty old car, so it's just scented with the pleasant smell of lemons. New set of D'Addario 10s. I'm just scraping graphite from a pencil into the nut slots so that the strings don't bind in the nut slots. The nut is reasonably well cut, actually. It doesn't really need any adjustment. It's pretty loose, actually. Okay, that's better. That's fine. So the action is very high, 2.25, then down to 2, then very low, all over the place in fact. So I've just done a rough adjustment by eyeballing the saddles and see what that looks like. So that's about 1.5, that's okay. 1.5, that's a little low. That's okay, that's below 1.5, which is fine, and that's just over 1. The moment of truth. Does it play okay? So the action's set nice and low and it all plays beautifully all the way up, apart from high up on the B string where it does this. So it jumps a whole tone from here to here, then plays the same note again, and then carries on. And that's because this fret here is too high. So when I'm fretting here, it's actually fretting out on this higher fret. We can demonstrate that with a fret rocker. So if I put the fret rocker centered on the high fret, which is the 21st fret, it rocks on the frets on either side. If I put it on the 3 frets coming up, they're level. The 2 frets above. So the 21st fret, this fret is the high fret. Now unfortunately I don't need to do a complete fret level just to deal with 1 fret, and I'm going to keep the strings on and just loosen them off and just lower that one just over on the B string. I'm going to use a small strip of 320 grit sandpaper, which is what I use on a levelling beam if I'm doing a complete fret level, just to take it down a little. I really just want to take it down around the B string and leave the rest, because the height elsewhere is fine. Okay. You can always take more off, but you can't add. Okay, so that's no longer rocking. I'm using a 3-corner fret crowning file to crown the file, followed by some 800 grit sandpaper just at the very edges of the fret, and then using some fret rubbers, going through the various grades up to super fine. Okay, that's sorted it. Right, just check the intonation now. Okay, that's the intonation set near enough for rock and roll. Let's see if the trem's going to work. I think that's still a little tad high, so I'm just going to bend that again a bit further in the vise. Before I pop the trem arm back in, I'm just going to put one of these little screws which come standard on American Strats, but not on Mexican, certainly not on cheap copy Strats. But it just helps stop the arm from flopping around, so I'm going to pop that in. There is a base to this, the thread. Not all Strats will actually have a base. You can take a string and pop it in, and if you can feel the bottom of it, and you know you can put one of these screws in. Whoever I pass this guitar onto, I'll have to tell them about that, because the first time they take the trem arm out, they'll tip the guitar over and they'll lose the screw, and everybody ends up losing the screws on these. the thing to do is, if you're taking the trem arm off, if you're storing this in a case, is to take the trem arm off and put a bit of tape over there, or take the screw out so you don't lose it. What that does is it just makes it a little stiffer. Some people like the trem arm to flop down after they let go of it. I like it to stay where it is, so I know where it is. And then just to push it away if I don't want it. Not everybody wants that. Some people like it to flop down. This came without a back cover, and a lot of people take the back cover off because it makes changing strings easier. I usually put one on, and I'm sure I've got a spare one somewhere. Of course, there's no guarantee that the screw holes will line up, and indeed they don't. So I don't really think I can even use any of those screw holes. So if I want to put a back plate on, I think the best thing to do is to fill these in and re-drill, just using matchsticks for this, which have a little bit of super glue on them. I've just split some of these matchsticks with a knife because they're a little too large. Just going to shave off the tops. It doesn't have to look perfect, this, because of course this will be covered by the back plate anyway. Just using a razor blade with tape on either end, which just raises it slightly off the surface, so it just catches anything which is slightly above the surface. And the thing to do is to line it up where you want it, and just ignore the holes that you filled, because obviously we're going to be drilling new holes. These screw packs are quite useful things that you can get from Amazon, because they're for guitar parts, and they've got all different sizes of screws and springs that all the things you'd be likely to ever need on a Stratocaster. And in terms of what size drill bit to use, if you just measure sort of halfway. I mean, that's a 2.8 millimeter, measuring it on the inner thread, and something that's a little bit less than that. So that's 2 millimeters. So just slightly less than what you're doing measured halfway is fine. So I'm just going to use a brad awl to start things off. In the UK, you have to be 16 to buy one of these tools because it's considered a dangerous weapon. Now, if you're worried about drilling through the plastic, you could take that off and just drill the holes, but I'm going to cheat and just go straight through. This is an old plate that's actually got a slight crack in the edge, but I'm not going to buy a new back plate for this. There's only so much money you want to spend on guitars at this level. When you're tightening these screws in, don't over tighten them, because metal against plastic, there's only going to be one winner. You don't need to put any force in really at all. Well, that's it. I think we're there. Just going to put some graphite on the string tree before I pop it back in. Actually, there's one more thing to do which I forgot to do, which is to just check the pickup heights. So I'm just using this homemade brass measuring tool. You can buy a tool from StewMac or you can make your own. Just ground down to about 2 millimeters. Brass because you're not then fighting with the magnet on the pickup, because of course brass isn't ferromagnetic. And when you check the pickup heights, you fret at the last fret, so that's too high. Needs to come down a fraction. Just pop the buttons back on. Make sure they're all lined up properly. Trim arm in. And we're all ready to rock and roll. I think this looks very nice now. So let's go and see what it sounds like. Okay, so here we are with the Acoustic Solutions Black Strat copy, playing through a Yamaha THR32, mic'd up with a Shure SM57. Let's see what it sounds like. Okay, so what do I think of this inexpensive Strat copy? What are the good points and the bad points? Well, the good points, I think it's a lovely neck. It's not too thick, not too thin. Got some lovely wood grain on the back. It's a lovely piece of rosewood. These guitars were made, I think, that this is probably 2006 if I'm deciphering the code number on the back here. And these were made at a time when rosewood was not in short supply, and it's got a massive, great big thick slab of rosewood on here, which is quite characteristic of guitars of that era, which of course is one of the reasons why, you know, we need to bring these guitars back to life. Without getting all tree huggy about it, there's a lot of natural resources have gone into making a guitar like this, so it's important that we use them, make them play, and don't throw them away. So it's a lovely neck. I think that's a really good strong point of this guitar. The tuners are very good, and surprisingly so for a cheap guitar. There's none of the grittiness that you feel with a lot of cheap tuners. They feel very smooth, no problems at all with the tuners. The body is lightweight. It's slightly thinner than your standard American or Mexican Strat. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, doesn't feel like a higher end Strat, but then again it's lightweight, and sometimes just having a nice lightweight guitar can be a good thing. You don't always want to be carrying around a really heavy guitar around your neck, and for something that's just, you know, around the house to pick up and play, it feels really good. Other good points, I think it looks really good. The body, the black and the cream pickguard, which has aged naturally. This is the first black Strat I've ever owned, and I've always thought that they looked a bit sort of dull in pictures compared to, say, a three-tone Sunburst, but in fact, actually, I think it looks great with the rosewood fingerboard and the cream pickguard. So I think those are all strong points. What are the weak points? Well, the electronics. The ceramic pickups are fairly typical for cheap ceramic pickups that you find on Stratocasters at this level. I think they work very well in the neck position. They give a reasonable sort of sound of a Strat when you're in the mixed positions of the neck and middle, or bridge and middle. I think as you go more towards the bridge, they become a little bit harsher, and I think probably the bridge pickup on its own isn't something that I would want to use. If I was keeping this guitar, I would imagine I would be probably just playing on the neck most of the time, and I think on the neck position you get quite a nice warm sound out of these ceramic pickups. I just don't think they work so well on the bridge. They may work with gain, I don't know, I don't play with gain, so I can't say for that, but on a clean sound it doesn't have obviously the brightness and sparkle of Alnico pickups, and you're not going to expect that. The tone controls seem to go from very bright to very muffled. Again, it's not really an issue for me because I always just play with the tone controls fully up, and if I want to adjust anything, I'll adjust it on the amplifier. But you know, these are the obvious limitations. I mean, everything works. As we saw in the setup, obviously the hardware is cheap, but as long as you set the guitar up properly and don't abuse it, there's no reason that anything is going to break on this guitar. So I think overall, I think it's a very reasonable and surprisingly good in terms of the neck for a guitar that essentially has just been sold through a catalogue supermarket shop, which has just been branded with the Argos catalogue shop branding of acoustic solutions. I think it's a very reasonable. I don't like the term beginner's guitars because it suggests that it's only appropriate for a beginner to play it, and I think, you know, anybody can play this guitar, and it would be a very reasonable guitar if you perhaps were a Les Paul person and you just fancied having a Strat lying around it. Would be perfectly acceptable for that. So all in all, I think it's quite a reasonable guitar for the money. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, then stick around and I'll probably have more of these sort of videos. Okay, thanks. Till next time.